There's a very famous story about a psychiatrist who wants to understand why is it that psychiatrists live such crappy lives. They know so much about the brain and the mind, but they seem to have one of the highest rates of divorce, one of the highest rates of substance abuse, and one of the highest rates of suicide. Something's not quite right. So this psychiatrist does all this research, and he goes all across the world to find out which group of people, amongst doctors, lawyers, nurses, who are the people that have the best lives. After all his research, he finds out the group of people that really have the best lives are monks and nuns. So he finds this Zen monk in Japan, flies all the way down, and starts to listen to him. And the monk's giving a lecture. The psychiatrist sits down. The first hour goes. The monk totally ignores the psychiatrist. The second hour goes. The monk totally ignores the psychiatrist. The third hour goes. The monk totally ignores the psychiatrist. By the end of the third hour, the psychiatrist is severely pissed off and just can't take it anymore. And he says in his loudest voice, "Excuse me, don't you know who I am? I'm the head of the Psychiatric Association, and I'm here to understand why is it that you monks and nuns are so happy all the time, and us psychiatrists live such crappy lives." Monk doesn't say a word. Quietly walks up to the psychiatrist. In front of the psychiatrist, there's a jug of water. He starts to pour, keeps on pouring. The psychiatrist goes, "Whoa, whoa, it's too full, nothing's going to go in." Monk speaks for the first time and he says, "You're right. No matter how good my stuff is, you are too full." What I find in life is that sometimes we get too full. We think we know everything. Then something comes around and empties us out. For some people, it's an amazing job. Oh, it's lovely. And guess what? You get fired. For some people, it's that, you find your soul partner, we're in love. And then you get a text. Or somebody changes their Facebook profile. For some people, it's that routine health checkup that you go for. A little lump on the side of your neck. And guess what? It's not that routine. My belief is what happens next is what resilience is about. My belief is what happens next is what leadership is about. Some people feel this void in their life and they fill it up with alcohol. You know what I mean. Some people fill it up with food. There's all these emotions they need to deal with, but they eat and they push it deep down inside. Some people choose work. I call it workaholic, chocoholic, alcoholic. It doesn't matter what your poison is, it's not resilience. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I was born in India in a place called Assam. I came to Australia when I was 4 years old. I was a dorky Indian kid with no friends. You can go, "Ah." Thank you. It was kind of tough. Until I discovered a game called rugby union. And when you get good at rugby in Australia, you get really popular. By the way, Indians don't play rugby, we play cricket. Can't stand cricket. So I played for the rep team, and so my parents saw me going from this dorky Indian kid to this rugby-hungry, girl-hungry fiend. And at the age of 13, they had a bright idea, and they thought they'd send me to an ashram back in India to be a monk. No, it wasn't funny. So for the next 7 years, I was a monk. And I came back to Australia when I was 19. I did an honours degree in economics, I did an MBA, joined a company called McKinsey & Company, which is a management consulting house. I was a diplomat for Australia. They used to call me the coconut. Have you heard this? Brown on the outside, white on the inside. You haven't heard of that? I was the head of strategy for AMP, St. George Bank. I thought I was really smart. I started my own venture capital business. Life was great. You're going to find this a little bit weird, but I was a little bit full of myself. I know it's kind of weird, but I was. Until I had my emptying out experience. And for me, it was the death of my first daughter. And when she died, everything changed, and it changed in an instant. And what my life was about before was never the same again. And I struggled. I struggled with depression. I struggled just trying to get out of bed. I could have easily become an alcoholic. I could have easily become a drug addict. I could have easily become homeless. And I struggled. And I was so lucky that in my past I had something behind me. And to get out of that depth of depression, I went back to my monastic training, and that pulled me out. The other thing that pulled me out was finding something that I believed in, finding my calling. And for me, that's the prevention of youth suicide. And I'm deeply involved in that. I work in an organization called Are You OK? If you haven't heard of it, please do. So what I find is that working with many, many organizations, I find that people are struggling. And they're struggling at 3 levels. And I call it the me, the we, and the it. The me is the personal level. The we is the people they love, their family, and the it is their career or the money. So what I find is that a lot of people in organizations are depleted. They're absolutely exhausted. You go up to anybody and say, how are you doing? Oh, I'm really busy, really busy. Nobody goes, oh yeah, I'm chilling. They're just exhausted all the time. Then people are feeling disconnected. I cannot tell you how many people I know that are struggling in their relationships because they just can't make it work because of the intensity of work. And lastly, they're disengaged. One of the biggest challenges in organizations today is disengagement. People just don't want to be there. So why should this bother you? It doesn't really affect you. Well, I think it should. The reason for this, is that of the 100 economic entities in 2016, 31 were countries. The other 69 were companies. These companies have a disproportionate impact on the world that we live in. Let's take Walmart, for example. If you look at Walmart's revenue and compare that with GDP, Walmart's revenue is bigger than the total Australian GDP. It's double that of Switzerland. That's kind of interesting. And why is that interesting is because we've got some serious challenges ahead of us, be it with global warming, and these companies can help. Mr. Trump didn't want to sign the Paris Agreement, but in one way it doesn't matter because all these large organizations, with the stroke of a pen, can adhere to the carbon targets. If you look at environmental degradation, it kind of sucks. But once again, there is a process that's away from the legislative process, away from governments. There are companies that don't have to worry about getting re-elected. Here's the deal. Walmart, if you're listening, or Woolworths or Coles, you can decide to ban plastic bags overnight. How cool would that be? Walmart, Woolworths, Coles, if you're listening, ban the bag. But it's really funny, you know. We really struggle. They have so much power, but we have a huge problem. We have a huge problem with these organizations, and it is this. The problem that we have is fear. People that are working in organizations are incredibly fearful. They call it stressed. They're stressed out of their frickin' head. And one of the reasons for this is organizations have adopted what I call a war model of business. They think that business is like going to war, and it's scary. And it's coming out in their language. And language is really important because it determines the metaphor that people use to live and to work. Let me give you some examples. Here's the first example. I hear this all the time. Oh, Kamal, we need to get our message out to the troops. They're not troops. Troops have army fatigue and machine guns. These people have suits and ties and blouses and skirts. Why would you call them troops? It's a warlike approach to business. And we have paid a terrible price. Here's another one. People use the word deadline. Why, we have got a wellness program for our people, but they have to meet their deadlines. The word's got dead in it. Why do you use the word deadline if you don't want people to be stressed? I think there's a shift happening. And the shift is this. We have to move from the art of war. Now, this book was really big in the 1980s and 1990s. Ladies and gentlemen, the world's moved on. We can't afford to fight this war. The war on drugs, terrorism. Wars don't work. What we need to do is we need to go from Sun Tzu to Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu wrote a book, and if you haven't read it, please do. It's about the way. It's about how we flow through life, not power through life. Now, there is a solution. There is a solution, and this solution is what I call the three-step approach around the me, the we, and the it. The first one is you need to create mental clarity. In organizations, I've not met somebody who wants to screw up the environment. I haven't met somebody that wants to put kids in sweatshops. They need to have the mental clarity, though, to make sure that they can actually act upon their values rather than the noise that's going around. Number two is they need to feel connected. People need to invest in connection. Here's the thing, though. Most people are giving their worst energy to the people who will come to their funeral. I'll repeat that. Most people are giving their worst energy to the people who will come to their funeral. Let me tell you what I mean. Imagine this scenario. I've come home. Hi, honey. Hi, kids. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. You with me so far? Yeah. Then the client calls. Ring, ring. Oh, hey, how you doing? How come you could give them your best energy but not us? If you want to stay connected to the most important people in the world, make sure you give your best energy to the people who come to your funeral. I can predict your life. I know how amazing your life will be. If you're giving your best energy to the people who come to your funeral, your relationships will flourish. If you're giving your worst energy to the people who come to your funeral, it's going to crash and burn. And lastly, you need to create congruency. You need to make sure that the me, the we, and the it are pulling in the same direction. I want you to focus on your calling. Figure out what your calling is. Try and understand what is it that keeps you up at night. So, from the me, the we, and the it, we need to go from being depleted to clarity. From the we, from disconnected to connected. And lastly, from disengaged to congruent. Let me finish off on a story that's really changed my life, because I think as we look at the world ahead of us, we need to make sure that we're resilient. Our organizations are resilient. Our people are resilient, because we've got some serious challenges ahead of us. This story happened in the Vietnam War. There was a battle that was being waged for 3 days between the Viet Cong and American GIs. We call these people the Viet Cong, but who were they really? They were mums and dads, teachers, lawyers, accountants, just like you and I. We call these people American GIs, but who were they really? What was the average age? 19 years old. Imagine where you were when you were 19 years old. These kids were in a battleground. Into this scene came 6 monks. They weren't wearing army fatigues, they weren't wearing guns. They had the one thing, and that was their begging bowls. An act of humility, a sign of humility. What they did is they started to walk across this battlefield. What happened next was amazing. In the words of David Bush, the American GI who recounted this story, he said, "The war stopped, the battle stopped." I couldn't understand why I'd want to shoot at another human being that I didn't know. Ladies and gentlemen, there are wars happening. For some of you, it's happening within yourself, with your food, with your alcohol. For some people, it's happening in your relationships, with your partner, your kids, your parents. For some of you, it's with your careers and what you want to do in life. My request to you is very simple. Go home, try not to declare war, declare peace.